Hey guys, Jonathan Mead here. Today I'm going to talk to you about troubleshooting your squat. And when I mean squat, I mean the squat not as so much of an exercise, right? So not like loading a barbell and doing squats like that. Not even doing unweighted squats as an exercise, but the squat as the natural human resting position, and also the squat as a dynamic posture that allows for other movements, right? So originally the squat was meant in a lot of ways for foraging, right? It allows us to be close to the ground, to dig into the ground, to reach, to pick berries or whatever. In modern times it might be used more so for something like gardening, but the squat is not just this position that is even supposed to be static, right? So you can use it in a static way, but it's not limited to just being static. So with that in mind, if you're having trouble getting into this position, there's a few different things that could be happening. So first of all, many people try to get into the squat and their heels are up off the ground like this. And in that case, the problem is not 100%, it's not 100% certainty that it is ankle flexion and a lack of range of motion in the ankles, but it's pretty likely that that's the case. So if you have trouble getting your heels on the ground into the squat position, then you probably have really tight calf muscles, and the back of your legs in general are probably very tight, mostly caused by excessive sitting. So obviously addressing not sitting as much is huge, and you want to try to change your postures as much as possible throughout the day. But we can also do some corrective exercise or some corrective stretching. So what you're going to want to do is grab something like a medicine ball or a yoga block, or even, this isn't as good, but you can use kind of like a rolled up towel as well. You just want to make sure it's pretty tight, because you don't want your foot to just go through it into the ground. But what you're going to do is put this on the ground. You're going to put the top of your foot on it, and then you're going to use that to stretch. So this doesn't do a whole lot for me. It might do more for you if you have really tight calves. So I'm going to use this medicine ball right here. You could also use a curb. That works really well if you're outside and you're walking around and you want to get some stretching in. You just want to place your foot on there, and then you just want to lean into it, making sure that your pelvis stays neutral. So I don't want to get into this rounded kyphotic position with my lower back. I want to make sure that stays flat and my pelvis remains neutral. So I'm going to stretch through here. I can also play around with bending the knee a little bit too, and that'll stretch a different part of my lower leg. So that is a stretch you can do to help with increasing ankle mobility, so you can more gradually get to your heels on the ground and making contact. However, I would say, squat any way that you can. In the meantime, if you have to, you can use something like this, put it underneath your heels, and just use that to get on the ground. That works just fine. All right, let's talk about another problem that is really common with the squat. So a lot of times people go to get into the squat and they end up in this kind of like rounded forward position, and they might even be far down on the ground right here, or close to the ground right here, but they're in this really rounded position and they're all hunched forward. What this usually indicates, in my experience, is a lack of hip flexor mobility, so this muscle right here in the front of the hips, as well as the psoas too, and a lack of flexibility in the hamstrings. So with stretching out the hip flexors and the hamstrings, the mistake most people make is they think that they're stretching the hip flexors or the hamstrings, but they're really just kind of manipulating their body and fooling themselves, and they're not really getting the stretch they think they're getting. So allow me to demonstrate. So if I want to stretch out my hip flexors and my psoas, so I can get that really nice upright position in the squat, I might go into the stretch, and then I might just think that I'm stretching, but really all I've done is thrust my rib cage forward, rounded, my lower back, and I'm not really so much stretching this part of my body. So what we want to do is when we're in this stretch, we want to make sure that the pubic bone, this bone right here, is lining up with this bony protrusion here on both sides of your hips, which is called the as-is bone. So if you lie on the ground on your stomach, you can feel this. I encourage you to do so. I'm not going to do it right now, but if you lie with your stomach face down and you press your pubic bone into the ground, you can feel that it lines up with these two bones right here. And that's what we want when we're doing this lunge stretch, right? So we want to make sure this pelvis stays neutral, these 3 points lining up, and then we stretch forward. So as you can see, I can't stretch nearly as much when this stays neutral and when my ribs stay down, right? I can fool myself in thinking I'm getting further, my ribs down, and pushing my pubic bone back, but I'm not getting the stretch that I really want, which is through the psoas and through the hip flexors. So again, just making sure the ribs stay down and that pubic bone stays forward in line with the as-is bones. So that's the first stretch that you can do for the front, and that'll really help release some of that psoas and that hip flexor tension. But what about the hamstrings? What about the back of the leg, which gets really tight with chronic sitting postures, and it also limits our ability to get back, deep into this stretch in the squat. So you might be getting in here, and because you don't have the flexibility in here, you try to go forward to compensate, and that's what we don't want. So always go as low into the squat as you can while maintaining really good form and not compromising your structure, right? It doesn't really do you any good if you can get deeper into the squat, but it looks like crap. So very important. But let's give you a stretch for the hamstrings. So again, a lot of you are probably familiar with downward dog, which is great for stretching out not only the hamstrings, but also the calves and all of the back musculature on the back of your body. But a lot of people do it in a way where they're just kind of going into this position and they're totally rounding their back. So you're not actually stretching the hamstrings. You're kind of just putting a lot of tension and stretch into the lower back. So again, back to that neutral pelvis, we want to make sure that that stays neutral and we have a flat back in the downward dog, so we're actually stretching the hamstrings, the muscles that we really want to stretch. So you're going to start from a push-up position, right? A lot of people start from this downward dog, or from this all fours position, and that puts you in smaller angle, which doesn't quite give you the same stretch as if you start from a push-up position. So we want to start from a push-up position, press up, maintaining a neutral pelvis, and bending the knees without doing this thing right here. So again, keeping that neutral pelvis, keeping the ribs tight and down. There you have it. That's your stretch for the hamstrings. I encourage you to spend 10 minutes a day doing these stretches, the calves, the hamstrings, the psoas and the hip flexors, and it's going to help you a ton with your squat. It's going to help you really open up a lot of those muscles that are keeping you restricted and keeping you from getting into the squat with good mechanics and good form. So try that out. Let me know what you think. Also, big shout out to Kelly Starrett and Katie Bowman, who have been two of my biggest teachers who I've learned a lot of these techniques and these alignment principles from. So thank you to them. I encourage you to check out Katie's work and Kelly's work. You can find Katie at katiesays.com. You can find Kelly Starrett at mobilitywod.com, and they have tons of great stuff, so you can dive into this much deeper. They can explain it way better than I can, but hopefully this gives you a little bit of a primer that you can use to get started. So like this video if you got some value out of it, share, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.